Alright, my name's Edmund. This is my final exam. Alright, so the first question on Sunday, December 4th, we had our first lasting snow in West Michigan. How did the snow event relate or not relate to the article you read by Harmon? Is typically November snow in West Michigan of greater intensity than in late January? Why or why not? The snowfall would support the findings. They discovered that the lower half of the state often started seeing snowfall in December when the northern half had already been exposed to it for a much longer period of time. Uh, Is typically November snow in West Michigan of greater intensity than in January? Why or why not? Typically, November snow in West Michigan is of a greater intensity. The storms in the early months come out from the west closer to the Rockies. It gradually shifts to a southern starting point. The southern point leads to less storms and less intense storms hitting West Michigan. What is the impact of what Lake Michigan at water temperatures on winter snow in West Michigan? As storms move over the warmer waters of Lake Michigan, the air becomes warmer and absorbs more moisture. When the denser, warmer air hits the coast of Michigan, it begins to cool again from the cooler ground and cause a heavy snowfall. Since the storm began over warmer waters, if the storm would have started over land, it would have been a lesser snowfall. By what decade were the population distribution settlement patterns in Michigan determined and why? By 1860, much of the good areas of the state had been settled. The settlement patterns that we see during the 1800s are the same settlement patterns we currently have in Michigan. Most of the lower half of the lower peninsula has been settled with relatively low settling and population distribution in the northern half of the lower peninsula and throughout the upper peninsula. By 1860s, parts of along the Lake Michigan coast had been settled, but the population distribution remained stronger from about Muskegon down to the border and from about Muskegon directly eastward into Bay County. As stated in the presentation during week 7, when talking about the human geography, it is the same patterns we see today and is noticeable if you drive through southern Michigan. You will see more population density than driving north of Mount Pleasant due to the settlement, the land we have down here, the industrial capabilities that kept many in this area. The furniture industry kept many in this area, and Detroit's industry kept many in that area during the 1800s. The main reason we have these large areas of land, mostly unsettled, and even today largely unsettled, was due to the history of the land. Early on, it was Indian territory and considered lesser land and largely not able to be settled. Question 3. In what sequence was Michigan by type of tree lumbered and why? What was the short-term and long-term impact of the removal of Michigan's trees? Was there a major impact difference between upper and lower peninsula? Initially, lumber in Michigan began by the French who were building forts for trading posts and missions in Muskegon. Eventually, as time progressed, British powers and eventually the United States would use a large source of hardwoods in Michigan to produce ships for war and merchant needs. The first major tree to be logged extensively in Michigan was the white pine around 1855. It was heavily logged until 1895 in the lower peninsula and until the early 1900s in the upper peninsula. When the white pine logging was complete, the attention of the logging industry turned to hemlock and hardwood species of trees. The white pine was logged first due to its size. It had a wide diameter and grew to be very tall. It also had a lot of branches that could be used for other wood products and other purposes. It was an ideal tree to produce mass in the construction of lumber due to the straightness of the tree. White pine in the UP was virtually wiped out and has not yet reestablished itself. Of all the watersheds that support the lumber industry in Michigan, the Muskegon watershed was the most productive with about 55 billion board feet supplied between 1834 and 1897. Lower Peninsula produced massive amounts of lumber, close to 135 billion board feet, versus the UP only providing 24.5 billion board feet. The heavy lumbering of the Lower Peninsula wiped out many of the natural forests that were in Michigan. Today we have low amounts of old growth forests in the Lower Peninsula due to the lumber industry. Lumbering was not environmentally conscious. The fire of 1871 that burned Highland was able to travel across Michigan due to the dense underbrush that was exposed from the intense deforestation that took place in the area. The massive deforestation also caused many areas to experience massive soil erosion. Clare County lost large amounts of soil from wind erosion since trees were no longer covering the area. The Kingston Plain was so heavily deforested that it was burnt so hot by fire that it was never able to regrow even to this day. The heavy logging boom caused many to build new cities in Michigan that thrived during the heavy logging days, but once the industry faded out, the cities themselves died from a loss of production, leaving many ghost towns scattered across Michigan. The logging moved north as the search for trees continued since the lower peninsula was beginning to have less due to the massive deforestation. And then the order was they went from the pines first initially, and then the pines, which was in kind of the upper northern part of the Michigan, upper northern part of the Lower Peninsula, by like Aughray, Oscoda, and all that. And then moved for hardwoods, and by 1890 they were going to the UP for the mixed wood forest up there. Question 4. Which bulk commodities shipped on the Great Lakes are synergistic in that they are related to, and lead to a single product? What is the role of sulaks? The bulk commodities that were shipped on the Great Lakes that are synergistic and that they will lead to one single product are coal, iron ore, and limestone. In order to produce steel. Steel was essential for the railroad industry in the 1800s and would become essential for the automotive industry later in the 1900s, although it had a more direct role, for sake of this question, for the railroad industry. This was essential to. Oh, that should have been erased. Oops. All three of these were consumed in large quantities, which required the use of the Great Lakes in order to keep up the demand. Ships were the only mode of transportation that were able to constantly supply the mills in order to keep up the demand for steel. The sulaks were important. The sulaks were important from taking materials from the states that bordered Lake Superior, so Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the UP. The materials that were shipped through the locks and then taken to the ports along Michigan and Lake Huron. The sulaks helped expedite the travel time for the materials from these areas. They would move out across the Midwest to support the steel industry and eventually the railroad industry. How, if any, has the economic potential of Lake County changed since the 1950s? Were there events in the past or recently that added to make a difference? Lake County's population has been dropping since the decline of the lumber industry. As the industry began to grow smaller and smaller, more people abandoned the land. The land was heavily damaged due to the large loss of trees in the area. It's causing massive damage to the surrounding environment. The federal government now owns 50% of the land in the county due to nobody wanting to move to it. The area became known as the Manistee National Park in 1945. The federal preservation areas do not create revenue for the county, so it's been having made large economic loss due to the federal government owning 50%. As the county still loses population creating open land, the federal and state governments continue to buy it for the parks. This causing more and more revenue to be lost for the local government, and it's kind of, I would say, it's starting to be irreversible since the federal government and state owns so much of it. The county is kind of it's going to keep losing out, and that's what's causing this massive economic downfall. Then question 6, focusing on the ILQ of juvenile crime, lung cancers, income, teenage pregnancy, and concealed pistol permits, and what you learned this semester discuss the common spatial denominator variable that behind these distribution patterns in the upper part of the lower peninsula in Michigan. Reviewing the videos by Hill, Beauregard, Kolb, Lucier, Lyle, Rake, Croft, and Manny, it showed various outcomes on the topics that they chose to dealing with the northern lower peninsula. The northern part of the lower peninsula had the lowest income rates of all the lower peninsula. It's important since the lower income tends to lead to higher crime, which was actually proven in Manny's video on CPLs and violent crime rates. 7 of the highest rated violent crime counties were in the northern lower peninsula. These areas also had the highest CPL carriers along with the UP. But what is interesting with this is the fact is that the divorce rates in the northern lower peninsula were lower than other areas of Michigan, except for Traverse County, which was mainly a tourism and does have higher income. Although these areas had higher violent crime, the juvenile crime rates were lower than other areas in Michigan. This means that the crimes were being committed by adults 18 or older. Other data about northern lower peninsula that was taken from the videos is that northern lower peninsula had slightly higher rates of uninsured drivers and that teen pregnancy has a slight pattern in the northern lower peninsula. What is contributing to these factors? The northern lower peninsula is a more rural area of Michigan. Jobs in the area tend to be low paying compared to the rest of the state. With a lack of sufficient income and lack of higher education, the area tends to be stuck in a trend that can be seen all across the United States and other counties that are the same. Heavy industry and well-paying jobs throughout history of Michigan tend to remain in the flatter areas in southern Michigan, although some did spread to northern lower peninsula. It was never to the effect of GM in southern Michigan and around Detroit. Since the jobs are low-paying, most of the highest education in these areas are high school diplomas and GEDs. And that is what I have for my final exam. So that's it. Thanks.